So my talk today is entitled Undoing the Past. And I have a PowerPoint for us to have a look at, in case you can't read it. It says 1492, the Native Americans discovered Columbus lost at sea. Perspective is everything. For every action, there's an equal reaction, is one of science's fundamental laws. And it can be observed very simply in the action of a clock pendulum. If it moves to the left, it will move to the right in an equal distance. We say what goes up must come down. And it seems to indicate there is no getting away with anything in the universe. And in spiritual terms, we say there's a spiritual law that mirrors the physical law, which is called the law of consequence, sometimes called karma. And so it's very important that we be willing to tell the truth about ourselves and the past, our own personal past and our collective past. If we have done wrong, then we need to own up to it and undo whatever damage we can by an equal and opposite action, if possible. It's one of the principles that's used in AA. And this is what we call justice. It does not come from a place of punishment, but rather from a place of love, of true caring, and of restoration of the hearts of both the victim and the perpetrator. And so today I want to discuss what some consider a very touchy subject called white privilege. Something that we may or may not even be aware of. And it was first brought to my attention when I lived in Hawaii, which I did for 9 years, where I encountered anti-white discrimination for the first time, which led me then to discover my white privilege that I wasn't even aware of up to then. And you have to understand, I grew up in Ireland where there were no people of any difference, really. We were all white Catholic. I can remember seeing a black man for the first time when I was about 17, and I was just riveted. It's like, wow, how fascinating, how interesting. So back to Hawaii, I was a haole to the locals, which is really a pejorative term for white people, which actually means the one who doesn't share the breath of life. And it comes from their tradition of when two Hawaiians would meet, that they would hug each other, and they would put their noses next to each other, and for a moment they would share the breath of life, the one breath of life. The white man stuck his hand out. He didn't put his face next to yours and share the breath of life. And so that's where the term came from. And in Hawaii, I suddenly noticed and felt that there was a resentment towards me for no apparent reason from some people. And that the source of it was that I was white. And I came to realize, of course, that it was based on the treatment of the Hawaiian people by the white missionaries and by the business people who had come from the mainland many years before, who had basically taken their lands from them, their culture, their song and dance, had replaced their language and replaced their religion and spiritual expression, and made them second-class people in their own land. And I remember one day very vividly realizing that I was one of only a handful of white people in a large shopping center in Pearl City. And I started to feel quite uncomfortable and even a little intimidated. I became a little paranoid, actually, because I was walking to my car, I was looking over my shoulder, was I being followed? It was a very interesting experience. Up to then, I'd always gone wherever I wanted to with a real sense of assurance and confidence, expecting that I would be treated nicely and welcomed by people. This was my first lesson in uncovering my sense of white privilege, which, as I said, I wasn't even aware of. And from this experience, I started to understand what it must be like to be a person of color in a white person's world. I felt what it was like to be in the minority and not to share in the culture of the majority. And for a little while, it played on my mind quite a bit. And I was certainly very aware of certain neighborhoods that I didn't go to. But I eventually got over it and got to a point of comfort where I really didn't even notice skin color or ethnicity. Suddenly I was very comfortable in the melting pot. But this was really an important lesson in uncovering the many ways that I took for granted things that just came with being white, which leads me to the main part of my talk today. So this is a little different than my usual talks. So this is kind of a little bit of a history lesson here. The papal bull, aptly named, we might say. Oh, come on, you were supposed to laugh at that. It's like everybody is serious. This is a very touchy subject. The bull just means decree. Inter Cetera, issued by Pope Alexander IV on May 4, 1493, played a central role in the Spanish conquest of the New World. The document supported Spain's strategy to ensure its exclusive rights to the land discovered by Columbus the previous year. And it established a demarcation line out in the middle of the Atlantic and assigned Spain the exclusive rights to acquire territorial possessions and to trade in all the lands west of that line. All other nations were forbidden to approach the lands west of that line without special license from the King of Spain. And this effectively gave Spain a monopoly on the lands in the New World. The bull stated that any land not inhabited by Christians was available to be discovered, claimed, and exploited by Christian rulers, and declared that the Catholic faith and the Christian religion be exalted and everywhere increased and spread, that the health of the souls be cared for, and that barbarous nations be overthrown and brought to the faith itself. And this was called the Doctrine of Discovery. And it became the basis of all white European claims in the Americas, as well as the foundation for the United States Western expansion. And in the US Supreme Court in 1823, the case Johnson versus McIntosh, Chief Justice John Marshall's opinion in the unanimous decision held that the principle of discovery gave European nations an absolute right to the New World lands. Now again, this was in 1823. So in essence, the American Indians had only a right of occupancy, which could be done away with, and indeed was in this way to kick the native peoples off their lands held in the US and in Hawaii. And it considered as terra nullius, nobody's land, any territory occupied by heathens, pagans, and infidels, meaning non-Christians. And this, of course, referred to the original inhabitants of the Americas. So, second slide. So the doctrine of discovery. This is what the government and religion used, the doctrine of discovery. The bull, Inter Cetera, made headlines again throughout the 1990s and into the 2000s when many Catholics petitioned John Paul II to formally revoke it and recognize the human rights of the indigenous non-Christian people. And in 2016, the native peoples of the Americas undertook what they call the Long March to Rome, the name that delegates used to describe their journey to the Vatican. It was a pilgrimage to petition the Catholic Church to finally get rid of the doctrine of discovery. The Roman Catholic Church hadn't and still hasn't rescinded the original bull from 1493, while it says subsequent bulls made it null and void. And they admitted that in 2016 that an apology was merited, though one still hasn't been given. So you say, what's this all got to do with us? What's this got to do with me? Okay. Well, while the doctrine of discovery may seem to be merely a historical travesty of justice, its effects linger on into the present in surprising ways. For example, you may be very surprised to hear that in 2005, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg cited the 1823 Supreme Court decision upholding the doctrine of discovery in an opinion denying a land claim by the Oneida people. Injustice is still able to be carried out based on this egregious and highly offensive law. And while our Constitution may claim equality under the law for all people, regardless of skin color, white privilege still holds sway in unimaginable ways. And while we may have laughed at the PowerPoint at the beginning, may have seemed humorous, you can now understand it in a much more telling way. Imagine that someone declared that your house and home was nobody's land or property, and that if someone came along, they could claim it, that they discovered your home and land, and that they were entitled to take it from you, kick you off of it. How would you feel if someone took your property right out from under you, and they had the law, a law of 600 years ago, to back them up? All this because you weren't a Christian, or the right Christian, or the wrong skin color. People tend to feel overwhelmed when faced with the actions of their ancestors or of their former governments. There can be a tendency to not want to face the cruelty and the injustice of the actions from the past, from which we've all profited. And this can lead to even not being willing to admit to continued racist, ethnic, and religious privilege. It can seem too complicated, too painful. Unity, in its short history, was subject to discrimination as a movement because it was not preaching Orthodox Christianity in the Midwest, and it was called a cult by mainstream Christian denominations. And if you still Google unity, you probably, in one of those findings that come up, will see unity cult. How do you like being described as part of a cult?
Sounds good.
There are many people who really believe that. Ken Wilber, in his outline of evolving and developmental spirituality, points out to us the need for us to wake up spiritually, but also to grow up emotionally and psychologically. And he says we need to clean up our act by facing our shadow. That's probably one of the biggest things as humans, so-called spiritual humans, that we need to do. Collectively, we need to face the shadows from our past. And until we do, we will continue to have racist and discriminatory behavior show up in our society. And we will continue to have laws on the books that uphold white privilege. Really good example, after the apartheid era in South Africa, they established a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to lance the wound of the injustice and inequality that had festered for so long in that country. And people were held accountable and responsible. The truth was told, and people were asked to be honest in looking at their own hearts and to acknowledge their own part in the hate and violence that had gone on for so many years. And while it didn't solve everything, and South Africa still has its problems and it still has its racism, it did allow for a new dawn to come to the people on both sides, black and white. When we look at the history of our own country, we see that this kind of honesty has never been applied to the treatment of the Native peoples, nor to the African American community. So any wonder then that we have the problems that we have in both of these communities, and the racial divisions in society that we see with the treatment of brown-skinned immigrants particularly. The truth is, they will continue if we refuse to acknowledge the wrongs of the past and the underlying resentment that people rightly have. The ancestral, the institutional, and the personal abuse, given or received, all of those energies hold hands inside of us. they're an energetic force field in ourselves, and we must be willing to look at that. We know from our own personal experience with family or friends who have wronged us, healing will never happen or take place for both parties until there's a coming together in honesty. An exchange of energy is required to create a new relationship. The ancient hurts can be healed, and when they are, this is a holy and a sacred moment that we are being called to. And we in unity, as advocates for a non-dual approach to life, must be the ones to lead the way, both in our own personal lives and in terms of the nation right now, with concern for the parties on both sides. We can undo the energy of the past, but it all starts with consciousness, with an awareness that comes from a courage and the willingness to be honest with ourselves and each other. We must be willing to seek the kingdom, even in the past, where it wasn't recognized or where it wasn't embodied by our ancestors. And indeed, in terms of our own personal lives, if it was our parents and our grandparents who were abusive in any way, or a family member, we have to just be honest about that. It's the only way that the energy can be released. So changing the past will change the energy of the present. We know that. That's the heart of the work of forgiveness. So this morning, as our meditation, I want us to listen to a Matt Kahn recording where he does one of his repeat after me's with a victim of abuse. And it's quite emotional at the beginning. She opens up to the pain of the abuse very quickly. But I'm inviting us to say the same words that he and she shared. In terms of your own abuse, in your own personal lives, but also in terms of this country, the ancestors, the mistreatment of the native peoples of the African American communities. You can be the one who helps to shift the energy. We keep saying that we are the light of the world. Well, here's an opportunity for us to shine that light into the dark. As we heal for one, we heal for all. We know that. And this work is vitally important now in these times of unprecedented anger, division, hatred, of demeaning speech, of putting people down, of treating people as less than. That is not of the light. We know it. But we need to be also careful, because we cannot stand in the light while holding another in the dark of judgment. And that's the trap that has been set for all of us, is to trick us into going into the non-dual approach to these problems. We are the light. Let us be the light and hold all in the light. So if you're not familiar with Matt Kahn and with the repeats after me, he says a line, and then we repeat it after.
So try this out. So try this out loud. I accept.
I accept.
That I was so traumatized by the violence of my family.
That I was so traumatized by the violence of my family.
That I was so traumatized by the violence of my family.
Which represents the ancestral lineages I'm here to clear.
Which represents the ancestral lineages I'm here to clear.
That I'm here to clear.
That I subconsciously told myself.
That I subconsciously told myself.
That this realm of abuse and pain.
That this realm of abuse and pain
is more powerful than the light.
Is more powerful than the light.
And that moved the abuse conditioning to the forefront.
And that moved the abuse conditioning to the forefront.
And moved my light to the background.
And moved my light to the background.
And brought all of my consciousness into activation.
And brought all of my consciousness into activation.
But prevented it from entering my personal realm.
But prevented it from entering my personal realm.
And in order to heal this,
I allow I allow
all cellular memories of abuse,
all cellular memories of abuse,
all ancestral lineages of the old paradigm,
our ancestral lineages of the old paradigm,
all cords to those
all cords to those
I thought were more powerful than the light,
I thought were more powerful than the light,
and all attachments to pain and victimhood
and all attachments to pain and victimhood,
to be cleared out of my energy field,
to be cleared out of my energy field,
return to the source of its origin,
return to the source of its origin,
transmuted completely,
transmuted completely,
and healed to completion now.
and healed to completion now.
Where I intend and embody the truth
Where I intend and embody the truth,
that the only power in reality is the power of light and love.
that the only power in reality is the power of light and love.
And from this moment forward,
And from this moment forward,
may I move as the light within this body,
may I move within the light within this body,
Of the light in his body.
ever replenishing this form
ever replenishing this form
and shining love in all directions
and shining love in all directions
for the well-being of all.
for the well-being of all.
And so I'm reborn.
And so,
How does that feel?
I am the light I am, together.
I am the light I am,
And so it is.
and so it is.